this is what a typical military thriller is, or this is what a typical military, action driven protagonist looks like, feels like, tastes like, hypothetically. Um, and I think
Not
that's
touching that one.
yes. I think that's why things, kind of feel like you were saying, a little bit stagnant, a little dusty. I would love to be able to take something like a character like me and make like my own military, like this is what a female military experience was. Problem with that is like, well, if I was really writing my story, nobody would believe it. It would have to be like truth is stranger than fiction. Everyone's like, there's no way any of that shit actually happened. But then I don't know how it would be received because again, like we talked about, there's still so many people who don't understand a woman's role in the military. They don't understand what you can and can't do. There's still people to this day who do not believe that a woman can be in the special operations community. There's people to this day who do not understand that women go outside the wire. So that we're fighting decades of ingrained, like stereotypes and just kind of misunderstanding about what that world is. And I mean, when you think about it, I mean, how many people join the military? Is like what 1% of the population, and then 1% of the 1%. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's a very small number of women in that very small number of people who serve. And then for me, I was in a smaller niche group of people doing what I did. So I mean, it's like totally unheard of when I go out and tell people like, yes, I was in the Navy. Yes, this is what I did. And it's just like, wow, that's a thing. So the ability to suspend reality, I think is a little bit of a higher bar when you have a female protagonist in a military role, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. My thing is like I was always taught from the very beginning that like authenticity is a coin of the realm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, um, you having this authentic background, like I'm going to be honest, I'm just saying all this from a perfectly selfish point of view. Because if you can start writing stories like that, that means that I can start writing stories like that because
Oh, okay.
they're
All
now
right.
within the genre. Because, right, nothing's done until it's done the first time, right? Like, oh, no one's going to buy that, but no one's going to do that. But then when someone does it, then they're like, oh, I wish I had done that first. And I need you to open this up for me because I'm tired of telling these same old stories.
Okay. Well,
But
now when you put it that way, I feel incredibly selfish that I have not done this, and I will make sure I do this for you.
you should. I need this. I
It's
need
like,
this in my life.
what I get what you're saying is like my viewpoint on things, like once I had my daughter, my viewpoints on things changed. And, I started looking at things like that, like, well, who's she going to look up to? And, is there something that's action driven that it doesn't involve a comic book or, a video game character that something that feels more real? And there really just isn't anything out there because, people will start pointing at things and there's more now. Don't get me wrong, there's more now, but once upon a time, all you had was like comic book characters and video game characters. And that's probably why I grew up loving James Bond and Indiana Jones so much. It's like those were my heroes. Notice I didn't say any girls.
I think like, Brad Thor, he did the Athena. Can't remember what
Got that
those
one.
books.
The
Yeah. And
Athena
then
Project, yes.
there was a show not too long ago on Paramount called The Lioness,
Nices.
which was a special operation. And
Huh?
then when I wrote my first two books, I drew a lot from there's a book on the Lioness program, and then there was another book where it talked about like the first women enablers going into
Mm-hmm.
the army and how they sent them up to brag and they were running them through CAG. And so when people were like, this didn't happen, I was able to be like, you don't know what's going on. Like I met uh, a female operator who was telling me this story at a bar about like her the first time she was putting an IV in somebody in the back of a Humvee under nods.
Yep.
And the guys like listening are like, that's like bullshit. But the people we were with, they were like, yeah, that happened. And then
Yep.
you talk to guys at Polish Grom, and some of the most deadly freaking snipers were the females they had. And um, so my thing is always like, I'll write whatever I can, but it's always going to be backed up in fact. And so my
Oh,
thing is like you have we got off tangent, but
No, no, no. You
I
actually
would
just
love to read
did
these
it.
stories because, you know, I know now through reading what it's like to be in a SEAL team. I know what it's like to be a Delta through reading. I do not know, and nobody else in the world knows what you know, and you're not sharing.
But there's a lot of things I legitimately can't share still, but at the same time, you just kind of made the point. It's like these things exist because you were with you are part of the that fraternity that is the military bond, and like even in law enforcement, you see it. You see what women bring to the table, and it's beyond the traditional go sit in an office and be a secretary. It's like you have to have experienced it to be able to accept that that is reality, because like you said, you bring up things that are no shit true, and people look at you like, well, that doesn't happen. Or they like, oh yeah, like GI Jane's out there, like look at the review, that like that movie just tanked.
That
But
movie was badass. I'm sorry.
I enjoyed it. I actually, like, entertainment wise, I completely enjoyed it. But look at the reception that movie had, is like kind of a vignette. People just didn't buy it. They don't buy a woman can do it. They don't buy a woman would do it. And they don't see it. So therefore it doesn't exist, and it's not authentic anymore. So, and that's part of, I think that's part of the barrier between, women writing military thrillers from that authentic, this is my experience in the military voice, because there's more people like me out there who did
Yeah, I
really
think just
kick-ass
recently,
shit.
the first woman just not too long ago graduated from SWIC. So,
Mm-hmm.
she's on that. And then, you got female Rangers. Anyway, what's interesting then is that your move now to kind of,
Psychological thriller.
yeah, that's kind of just blowing up, right?
I'm hoping it's going to blow up, but I, again, I like to think it also still comes from a place of experience, because when you've sat across from somebody who would like nothing more than to kill you in any way they possibly can, it gives you an idea of what sitting across from that person would look like. So when I'm writing a scene where like my psychopath is being a psychopath, I can draw on those kind of experiences, and being on the other side of the table and then not believing but needing to draw out information. I can draw on those experiences. So even though it's a psychological thriller instead of a military one, I can still use those experiences because, unfortunately, during my time in service, we were balls deep in the GWAT. And so there were plenty of people who I sat across from who really wanted to see me dead. Probably a little extra just because I am female. So there was a little
Hmm.
extra angst thrown at me. Um, so
So now
while
that
it's
you're in
not the
film
genre,
school, what?
oh, go ahead.
So now that you're in film school, what are you learning? You've written books, you've written novellas. How does that transition into what you're doing now with film school and now taking ideas and instead of putting it on the page, you're putting it on the page, eventually having to go to the screen. What is that like? Have you learned more from that? Is that challenging,
Oh, good Lord, yes.
opening up another layer?
That's the way I would describe it the most, is just because it is a very different way of telling stories. And you've probably seen this already, but especially with something like origin story, which is very inside my protagonist's head. There's a lot of internals going on there. I was actually challenged by another author friend of mine that I would not be able to turn it into a good movie just because so much of it is internalized. I took that
Hmm.
as a massive challenge, and that's my first movie script. So it's finished. I'm going to keep playing with it a little bit, but you have to take everything and make it something that you can see on screen. It has to all be visual. So you have to think about things like when somebody's having an internal conflict, what would that look like on screen? Are they sitting there, like balled up and like rocking back and forth? Well, that's what I have to put on the page. I have to put, that Elise pulled her knees up and starts rocking back and forth, bouncing off the
Hmm.
wall, just as a way to illustrate, what's going on internally without explicitly saying it. You also have to be careful. You can't tell like the actors or directors how to do their job. So you got to find that happy medium of writing out what you see in your head without telling them how to do it. So you need to allow for artistic expression on their end too, because who knows, they could come up with something better than I saw it in my head. Um, and so it becomes a very collaborative and
Hmm.
very, very visual medium.
So do you feel like you have less control in that type of a medium? Because I ask, because I'm currently writing for a video game company. And so I go in and we're talking about story, and I know
Hmm.
story. And but it's always we can't do that. I'm like, why the hell can't you do that? And they're like, well, um, story is very important, but gameplay is more important. And I'm like, okay, explain to me this because I can tell a story in any way you want me to tell a story. Um, but in a way, they take a lot of tools from you. And
Yeah.
I thought I was gaining a lot of tools because I'm like, oh, now I get to use this visual sense. Have you experienced that? And how, like, what do you have to adjust? Because I know there's a lot of people that want to be where you are right now. A lot of writers that want to be script writers, a lot of script writers that want to be novelists. And
Novelists.
like, how does that, it's all writing, right?
Yeah, it is all writing, but it is the techniques are different. And I don't think that anything's taken away necessarily. I feel like I'm being challenged. It really is exactly that. It is, okay, how do I take something that normally would be in somebody's head and present it in a way where somebody just watching can understand what's going on? And in that's the challenge of finding the right words to throw
Mm,
low on the page. Like you can look at somebody and you can know when they're having a crisis. You can look at somebody
right.
and know that they're sad. You can look at somebody and you can feel that emotion just by looking at you. The challenge then becomes, how do you put that on the page? And that's what you're trying to capture. And so while there is a bit of a restriction in what you can and can't do, it's just trying to find different words to be able to accomplish my goal. So that's why I call it a challenge. No, I would say there is a bit of a restriction when it comes to letting the directors direct, letting the actors act, and making sure you're writing so the production crew knows what you're talking about. So that's all the rest of the nuance that goes into it.
Mm,
And in that case, I think it would feel a little restricting because you might want to say, "Hey, this is when the actor, turns and smiles," or something that would just be really punchy and really fun, but you don't really want to direct the actor. You don't want to tell the actor what they would do. You have to make the dialogue stand out so well
mm.
that the actor naturally goes like, I am this character now, and because I'm this character, I would go, yes, this is where I turn and smile. And that is challenging to say the least, but um, it is difficult to resist that temptation to tell them what to do.
I never thought about that because like that's one of the hardest things as a writer. Is when you turn it over to an editor and you're like, "Don't touch my stuff," but they're touching your stuff. Like, did you touch my drum set? I know you did.
Like, did we just become best friends? Like,
Yeah.
no, and it's difficult to go into a world where you think, I know how to do this. It's happened to me twice now, so I think it was a little bit easier because I wrote a lot professionally when I was in the military. So when I start writing my book, I was like, I can write. I got this. This is no problem. And then I handed it to my editor, and she crushed my soul. And then so same thing when I get in, I start writing for script work, and I'm like, I got this. I write novels. I can do this. This is so much easier. There's like all kinds of white space on the page. This is going to be great. And then I get feedback from the professor going, yeah, you're telling, you're not showing. I'm like, son of a bitch. It's like,
Yeah,
here
they're
we
always
go
like,
again.
say less, say
Yeah.
less. You're like,